Emily Bennett pushed the front door open, the sound of laughter spilling out before she even stepped inside. The Bennett family home looked like something out of a glossy magazine. A massive tree sparkled with gold and silver ornaments, the fireplace glowed warm, and the long dining table was covered with crystal glasses, fine china, and plates of food that smelled heavenly. Everyone was already seated, voices rising with jokes and cheer, but when Emily walked in, the laughter softened. She was late, but not by much. Still, her stepmother Carla gave her a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Finally decided to join us," she said, her red lips curling into a thin smile. Daniel, Emily's younger stepbrother, smirked into his wine glass, while her father, Richard Bennett, barely glanced up. Emily forced a polite smile and slipped into an empty chair at the far end of the table. She wasn't dressed in glittering silk like her step-siblings, or covered in designer jewelry. Her dress was simple, neat, and a little worn. She folded her hands in her lap, feeling the familiar weight of being an outsider in her own family. The dinner went on with chatter about vacations, promotions, and expensive gifts. Boxes wrapped in glossy paper and ribbons were piled high on the sideboard. When it was time to exchange them, everyone's attention was loud and bright, until Emily reached into her bag and placed a small, neatly wrapped package on the table. It was plain compared to the others. The paper was simple red, tied with a thin ribbon. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then her cousin snickered. "Don't tell me you brought us socks from the dollar store again." Laughter broke out around the table. Emily's cheeks warmed, but she didn't flinch. She had expected this. She lowered her eyes as her stepmother's voice cut through. "Honestly," Carla said with a sigh, "some people shouldn't embarrass themselves trying to give what they can't afford." The words stung, and the laughter dug in deeper. Emily stared at the little gift in front of her. No one reached for it. No one thanked her. It sat there, ignored, like she did. She took a slow breath. Inside, she wanted to shrink, to disappear, but instead she lifted her head. Her voice was calm, almost steady. "I didn't want to bring something small," she said softly. "I brought something much bigger." The laughter quieted. Her family turned to her with confused frowns. Emily reached into her bag again and pulled out an envelope. She slid it across the table with steady hands. The glossy lights from the chandelier caught the white paper, making it almost glow. Forks stilled. Conversations died. No one moved. For the first time that night, every eye in the room was fixed on her. And Emily, the daughter they had dismissed, sat back in her chair and waited. Emily grew up in the Bennett household. Her late mother was the heart of the family. Her mother had a way of bringing warmth into every corner of the grand house. She remembered the way her mother would hum while cooking, how she always made sure Emily felt loved even when her father was busy with work. To Emily, her mother was safety, comfort, and strength all at once. But when her mother passed away, everything changed. The house, though just as big and beautiful, felt colder. Her father, Richard Bennett, remarried only a short time later. His new wife, Carla, was everything her mother wasn't: polished, sharp, and always worried about appearances. Carla quickly took control of the household, and Emily felt her place slipping away. At first, Emily tried to stay close to her father. She tried to be patient with Carla, to believe that things could feel normal again. But Carla made it clear she didn't see Emily as part of the new family picture. She often accused Emily of being ungrateful or weak. Every mistake Emily made seemed bigger under Carla's watchful eyes. And when Emily spoke up for herself, Carla twisted her words until her father believed Emily was being disrespectful. Richard Bennett, a man of wealth and power, had always been more comfortable in his office than in emotional matters. It was easier for him to agree with Carla than to fight. Slowly, Emily realized that her father preferred his new family, Carla, and the children she brought into the marriage. By the time her stepbrother Daniel grew older, he had already learned Carla's way of looking down on Emily. Daniel became a wealthy banker in his 30s, arrogant and full of pride. He loved to mock Emily whenever he could, throwing in comments about her low-class jobs, and how she never lived up to the Bennett name. He often bragged about his expensive suits, cars, and the clients he entertained, as though money was the only measure of worth. The more time passed, the less Emily saw her father. When she did, the conversations were brief. He asked if she was doing okay, but never really listened. He never asked about her struggles, never offered support. It was clear he saw her as a disappointment compared to the shining image of his new family. Emily, tired of feeling like an outsider in her own home, chose independence. She moved out, took low-paying jobs, and learned to survive on her own. She worked in diners, offices, and even cleaned houses for a while, whatever she could find to pay her bills. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. She learned to stretch every dollar, to live simply. Still, her siblings and cousins mocked her whenever they saw her. They whispered that she was a failure, that she didn't belong in the Bennett family anymore. And yet, no matter how much it hurt, Emily still came back for family events. Christmas dinners, birthdays, anniversaries, she showed up, always quietly hoping for something different. She longed for a moment when her father would look at her with pride again. She wished for a time when someone in the room would see her not as the poor Bennett daughter, but simply as Emily. The only person who ever stood by her was Aunt Grace, her late mother's sister. Grace was gentle but firm, a woman who carried her own scars of being overshadowed in a family obsessed with wealth. Grace defended Emily in small ways, an encouraging word here, a hand on her shoulder there. But she rarely raised her voice against Carla or Daniel. Grace hated conflict, and she knew how quickly the family turned cruel. Even so, her quiet support was sometimes the only thing that kept Emily from giving up completely. Emily's life had become a strange mix of strength and loneliness. She had learned to stand on her own 2 feet, but deep inside she still longed for connection. Each holiday she returned to the Bennett house with a small spark of hope, that maybe, this time, something would change. Maybe her father would notice her. Maybe her stepfamily would soften. Maybe she would finally feel like she belonged again. But year after year, the same coldness greeted her. The same mocking comments. The same invisible wall between her and the rest of the family. Still, Emily kept showing up. Not because she enjoyed the pain, but because she still carried her mother's spirit within her. Her mother had always believed in love, forgiveness, and the strength of family. And Emily couldn't let go of that hope. Not yet. That was why, even now, as she prepared to face another Christmas Eve dinner full of laughter and luxury she could never match, Emily gathered herself and walked through the front doors. Deep down, she knew this night would be different. Something was going to change. After being mocked for her gift, Emily did not argue. She did not raise her voice or defend herself. She simply sat there, her eyes steady, her face calm. Then she spoke quietly, but her words carried across the whole table. "I have something important for the family," she said. The laughter died down. Forks clinked against plates before falling still. Carla raised a sharp brow. Daniel leaned back with a smirk, and Richard looked at his daughter with mild confusion. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She placed it on the table and slowly slid it toward her father. "This is for you." Richard hesitated before picking it up. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the flap. Everyone leaned forward, curiosity flashing across their faces. He pulled out a set of official documents. His brows furrowed as he adjusted his glasses and began to read. Daniel scoffed. "What is this? Another job application form? A bill you want Dad to pay?" But Richard's eyes widened the further he read. His lips parted in shock. He looked up at Emily, then back down at the paper. His voice shook when he finally spoke. These are property deeds." The room fell into silence. The only sound was the crackle of the fireplace. Carla blinked rapidly, trying to process what she had just heard. Daniel let out a sudden laugh, loud and mocking. "There's no way," Daniel said, pointing at Emily. "There's no way you could afford property. Not you. You barely get by." He laughed again, shaking his head. "This has to be a mistake, or worse, a fake." Emily didn't reply. She simply lifted her glass of water, took a slow sip, and set it down again. Her silence made the air heavier, the tension sharper. Richard cleared his throat and read more from the document. His voice, though unsteady, was clear. "It says here, Emily Bennett is now the legal owner of the Westwood Mansion." His eyes flicked up to meet hers. This is your grandmother's old estate." Gasps rippled around the table. Some cousins covered their mouths. Carla stiffened in her chair, her polished smile slipping. Daniel's smirk vanished, replaced with disbelief. "That mansion is worth millions," whispered one of the relatives. Richard kept reading, his hands shaking more. It's been fully signed over. Settled in court. Everything here says it belongs to you now. Carla leaned forward, her eyes sharp. That's impossible. That estate has been tied up in legal battles for years. How could she? She stopped herself, realizing how desperate she sounded. Daniel slammed his palm against the table. This is a trick. You can't even afford a decent dress, Emily, and now you expect us to believe you own a mansion worth more than all of us combined? Ridiculous. Emily didn't flinch. She folded her hands in her lap, her calmness only making the others more restless. Her father stared at her, torn between shock and a strange, growing respect. For years, they had dismissed her as poor, as insignificant, as the weak daughter who could never measure up. But now, she was sitting before them with proof that she held something far greater than any of their expensive gifts. The weight of the moment settled over the room. Every sparkle of the chandelier, every tick of the clock on the wall, seemed louder. Emily finally spoke, her voice steady. I didn't lie. The mansion is mine. It belonged to Mother's side of the family, and now it has returned to me. The words landed like a stone in water, sending ripples through every heart at the table. Carla's lips pressed tightly together, Daniel's fists curled in anger, and Richard sat frozen, still holding the papers, his eyes darting between the documents and his daughter. For the first time in years, Emily was not the one shrinking under their judgment. She was the one holding power. And the family that had laughed at her moments before now had no laughter left. Carla's sharp voice cut through the silence like a knife. She leaned across the table, her eyes narrowed at Emily. Where did you steal this from? She demanded. Her fingers tapped against her wine glass, the sound sharp and impatient. Daniel quickly added fuel to the fire. He pushed back his chair with a loud scrape and pointed at Emily as if she were a criminal. Exactly. There's no way this is real. You don't have that kind of money. You've never had anything. Admit it, you faked these papers. It's fraud. Emily sat still. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't flinch. Her calmness only seemed to anger them more. She glanced at her father. Richard sat stiffly at the head of the table, the documents still in his trembling hands. His face was unreadable, part shock, part doubt, part something softer he couldn't yet name. He didn't speak, and his silence stung Emily more than Carla's sharp words or Daniel's accusations. She could see the question in everyone's eyes. How could Emily, the forgotten daughter, the failure, have achieved this? Carla leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. I will not sit here and watch this nonsense. If you want us to believe you, explain yourself. Where did this come from? Emily drew in a steady breath. She let her gaze travel around the table, meeting every doubtful eye before she answered. Her voice was calm, almost too calm for the storm around her. I didn't steal anything. I worked for it. I fought for it. And I earned it. Her words didn't ease the tension. They only made it sharper. Carla scoffed loudly. You? Earned something like this? Don't be ridiculous. But Emily's mind drifted, unbothered by her stepmother's sneer. She remembered the years after she left the Bennett house. The tiny apartment with a leaky roof, the long nights working at the diner until her legs ached, then rushing to her second job cleaning offices. She would collapse into bed only to wake again at dawn. Still, she had kept going. And on top of all that, she quietly took night classes. No one knew, certainly not her father nor her sneering siblings. She studied business, law basics, and real estate management, believing that one day knowledge would be her key. It was at a nonprofit office where she sometimes volunteered that she first heard about property auctions. She listened closely to the lawyers who passed through, quietly asking questions, quietly learning. That was how she discovered a hidden truth. Her maternal grandmother had once owned a grand estate, Westwood Mansion, but it had been neglected, locked in complicated legal battles after her passing. Most of the family had forgotten about it, or perhaps they didn't care. But Emily cared. It was her mother's bloodline, her grandmother's home, and it had been left to rot. She started digging, visiting courthouses, reading files until her eyes burned. She saved every extra penny she had, not for clothes or luxuries, but for legal fees. She endured rejection after rejection, delay after delay, but she didn't stop. It took years. Years of sitting in cold courtrooms while lawyers whispered behind her back. Years of being told she didn't stand a chance. But Emily kept showing up, patient and determined. Piece by piece, she untangled the disputes. And finally, after endless hearings, the court ruled in her favor. The estate was hers. Not because of luck, not because of theft, but because she had fought for it when no one else cared. Her eyes returned to the present. Around her, her family still glared in disbelief. Daniel's voice broke the silence again, loud and arrogant. Even if this is true, even if you somehow tricked the courts, you think you can just keep it all? That mansion belongs to the Bennett family. To all of us. You should share it, Emily. Carla's voice dripped with poison as she turned to Richard. You can't possibly allow this. She's manipulating us. She doesn't deserve that estate. She'll waste it. You need to talk sense into her. She placed a hand on Richard's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging lightly into his sleeve. Richard, you know this isn't right. Richard stayed silent, staring down at the documents as if they might explain themselves. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. Emily's heart tightened. For a brief moment, she had hoped her father might defend her, might finally see her. But instead, his silence showed what she had always known. He was torn between his daughter and the woman sitting at his side. Daniel leaned closer, his voice low but sharp. If you think you can walk in here and act like you're better than us, you're wrong. I'll drag you to court myself. You'll lose everything. Don't test me. Emily met his glare. For the first time, she didn't feel small under his words. She didn't feel weak or ashamed. She realized this fight wasn't about money or property. It was about her dignity. It was about reclaiming her place, about honoring her mother's legacy that had been buried under Carla's shiny perfection and Daniel's arrogance. She straightened her back, her voice firm. This isn't about you. It isn't about money. This is about what was ours, what was hers. She let her eyes flick toward the family portraits on the wall, where her mother's face had long been replaced by Carla's. I didn't fight for that house to impress you. I fought for it because my mother's memory deserved better than to be forgotten. Carla scoffed, Daniel fumed, and Richard finally lifted his eyes. For a moment, Emily thought she saw something, guilt, regret, maybe even pride. But he said nothing. The table was split, half stunned into silence, half sharpening their claws for attack. And Emily, sitting calmly with her water glass, understood the truth. This dinner wasn't about gifts anymore. It was about power, about memory, about the love of a mother who had been the true heart of the Bennets. And no matter how much they schemed, no matter what they said, Emily knew one thing for certain. She was no longer the weak daughter they once dismissed. She had finally reclaimed her voice. Daniel publicly accuses Emily of lying. He shot up from his chair, his face red with anger, and slammed a folder of papers onto the table. I knew it, he shouted. I knew you were faking this. Look what I found. These records prove you don't own anything. You forged those deeds. You're a fraud, Emily, just like you've always been. Gasps filled the room. Some cousins leaned closer, eager for the drama, while Carla folded her arms with a satisfied smirk. Finally, she said, the truth comes out. Daniel grabbed the papers and waved them in the air like a weapon. Everyone sees it now. She's nothing but a liar, trying to shame us with a fake story. Pathetic. All eyes turned to Emily. For a moment, the air felt heavy, as though the whole house was waiting for her to break, to cry, to crumble under Daniel's attack. But Emily didn't move. She didn't even look rattled. Instead, she calmly reached into her bag again and pulled out another envelope, thicker this time, sealed and stamped. She placed it on the table in front of her father. Open it, she said softly. Richard hesitated, then tore it open. He pulled out a stack of signed documents, official court rulings with seals, stamps, and signatures from judges. His eyes scanned the pages, his hands trembling more with each line he read. These, his voice cracked, these are rulings from the court. They prove the mansion is hers. Legally. Beyond doubt. The room fell silent. Carla's smirk vanished. Daniel's hand, still holding his so-called evidence, froze midair. Emily finally spoke, her voice steady, firm. I didn't forge anything. I didn't steal. I fought for years to reclaim what belonged to my mother's family. And I won. Daniel's face darkened. He tried to argue again, but the words stumbled in his throat. No, this can't be right. It is right, Emily said simply. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace. For the first time all night, Emily's family had nothing to say. She let the silence sit for a moment, then leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady on each of them. But I didn't invite you here just to tell you about the mansion. Confused glances darted around the table. Carla frowned. Then what is this about? Emily's lips curved into a small, calm smile. It's not for you, she said. The words dropped into the air like a stone into water. Carla's eyes widened. Daniel's mouth fell open and Richard froze. I'm not keeping the mansion for myself, Emily continued. I'm turning it into a women's shelter. A place for women who are struggling, who have nowhere else to go. A place of safety and dignity. The shock that rippled around the table was louder than any argument. Emily's voice softened but carried strength. My mother used to take in women quietly. Neighbors, friends, even strangers. She gave them food, a place to sleep, and a bit of hope. She never bragged about it. She just did it because that's who she was. This shelter is for her. For her memory. For the heart she gave this family that you all chose to forget. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. She refused to let them see her break. The room was frozen. Even Daniel, always quick with a sharp remark, sat stunned. Carla's face paled, her lips pressing tight, unable to hide her disbelief. It was Richard who broke first. His shoulders shook, his head dropped into his hands. For years he had turned away from his daughter, choosing comfort and pride over love. Now he saw her clearly, saw the strength, the dignity, and the goodness she carried from her mother. His voice cracked through the heavy silence. Emily, he whispered, his eyes wet with tears. I am so sorry. All these years, I didn't see you. I didn't see what mattered. I should have. His voice broke, and he shook his head, unable to finish. Emily looked at him, her father who had ignored her for so long. A part of her wanted to run into his arms, to accept the apology she had waited years to hear. But another part of her, the stronger, wiser part, held back. She spoke gently but firmly. I don't need your approval, Father. Not anymore. What I needed was for you to stand by me when no one else did. And you didn't. Her voice wavered, but her eyes didn't. This isn't about you or Carla or Daniel. It's about Mom. And I'll honor her in my own way. The silence that followed was different now. Heavy with truth, heavy with shame. Emily sat tall, her head high, while the family that had once laughed at her sat speechless, their wealth and pride suddenly meaningless in the face of what she had built. Emily leaves the dinner, her head held high. The voices behind her are a mix of shock and whispers, but she doesn't turn back. For once, she doesn't feel small or ashamed. She feels strong. At the doorway, Aunt Grace quickly rises and follows her out. Emily, she calls softly. Emily stops, her breath visible in the cold night air. Aunt Grace steps close and pulls her into a warm hug. Your mother would be so proud, she whispers. Emily closes her eyes for a moment, holding on to the comfort of the only person who had always believed in her. As they stand together under the glittering Christmas lights outside the mansion, Emily feels the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. Memories flash through her mind like a silent film. Nights scrubbing office floors until her knees ached, serving coffee with a tired smile, counting coins just to pay rent. Long evenings spent alone, studying textbooks under a dim lamp, while her siblings showed off their new cars and expensive trips. The contrast had always been cruel, her sweat and struggle against their effortless wealth. But every hardship had shaped her, had led her to this night. She saw now that the mansion, the shelter, was not just about bricks and walls. It was proof that she had survived, that she had carried her mother's kindness into something lasting. Days later, as the shelter's preparations began, Richard appeared. He didn't arrive with gifts or speeches, just a quiet knock on the door. Emily opened it, surprised to see her father standing there in a simple coat, without Carla or Daniel. I wanted to see the place, he said softly. Emily hesitated, unsure if she should let him in. But then she stepped aside. He walked through the empty halls, looking around with a mix of awe and regret. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint, boxes of donated blankets stacked neatly against the walls. It was a far cry from the polished Bennett estate, but it was full of hope. Richard turned to her, his eyes tired. I can't change the years I ignored you, but maybe I can do something now. If you'll let me. Emily studied him for a long moment. Part of her still ached for his love, but she had learned too much to simply fall back into old patterns. You can be part of this, she said carefully. But only if you respect me. No more choosing silence. No more letting others tear me down while you watch. Richard's eyes filled with tears. He nodded. You have my word. Meanwhile, Carla and Daniel tried to control the story in their social circles. They laughed it off at dinners, telling friends that Emily was being dramatic, that she had stolen the estate unfairly. But the whispers spread anyway. People admired Emily's courage, her strength, and the way she turned her inheritance into something selfless. The more Carla and Daniel tried to twist the story, the more foolish they looked. For once, Emily wasn't the family embarrassment. She was the one people respected. One evening, standing in the shelter's main hall, Emily placed her hand on the cool wall and let out a long breath. She felt peace. She had carried her mother's spirit into this place, built not for wealth or status, but for kindness. She no longer needed Carla's approval. She no longer needed Daniel's acceptance. And though her father's support mattered, she knew her worth did not depend on him. For the first time in years, Emily felt free, free from their judgment, free from the chains of the past, and free to live with her head high. She had honored her mother's memory, and in doing so, she had finally reclaimed herself. Seen at the new women's shelter, the day of the grand opening. The building stood tall and welcoming, decorated with ribbons and fresh flowers. A small crowd had gathered outside. Neighbors, volunteers, and women who would soon call this place home. Children tugged at their mother's hands, their eyes wide with excitement. Emily stood at the front, a pair of scissors in her hand. Aunt Grace was beside her, smiling proudly. Richard stood quietly in the back, watching with wet eyes but saying nothing, respecting his daughter's moment. Emily took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her voice was steady, though filled with emotion. Some people measure wealth in what they keep, she began. But my mother taught me to measure it in what we give. This shelter is not just a building. It is a promise of safety, hope, and kindness for anyone who needs it. And it is my way of honoring her. Applause broke out, warm and heartfelt. Emily raised the scissors and cut the ribbon. Cheers followed, and the doors swung open. Women clapped, some wiping tears from their eyes, while children ran joyfully inside, their laughter filling the halls. Emily watched them go, her chest tightening with a mixture of pride and love. She tilted her head toward the sky, where the sun peeked through soft clouds. Quietly, almost in a whisper, she said, "This is for you, Mom." For a moment, she imagined her mother's gentle smile in the light above. Emily's lips curved into a quiet, content smile of her own. She no longer felt the weight of needing approval or belonging. She had found her place. Here, giving, building, and honoring the woman who had taught her what true wealth really was. And with that, she walked inside, ready for the new beginning. Hi loves, thanks so much for sticking around till the end. Sparkling heart, don't forget to like, drop a comment and hit that subscribe button. See you next time, bye. Waving hand.